Hi everybody, good evening. Tonight I'm going to be joined by Lisa Schumann, who is a fertility counselling specialist from the Centre for Family Building, and we're going to talk about donor conception. What donor conceived children want their parents to know. She's just written a fantastic article. You can find it via the link in bio. I find it fascinating personally because I do have sperm donor conceived children, so I'm speaking to them about it right now. So this is going to be a really any questions you have, please feel free to ask. This is what it's there for. So welcome everyone who's joining. Good evening. Hi Lisa.
Hello.
Well, good afternoon I should say. How are you today?
Great. Thank you so much for having me on your show.
You're welcome. And I've just been introducing you a little bit, and also the topic of how to speak to donor conceived children and the narrative that you can start from a very early age. Before we start talking about that, please could you just introduce yourself a little bit and the Centre for Family Building?
Sure. So I'm a fan of yours, number one. and I love working with you. I have been working in the fertility field for about 25 years now. It's a long time. And I've been through my own infertility journey. I've been, tried almost everything there is under the sun. So I've, kind of walked the walk. I've been there. I understand, certainly understand. And, after so many years of working both in clinics and also in my own private practice, I noticed so many of the problems that come up for people come up again and again and again. And so I decided to form my own group, and that's the Center for Family Building, where we could disseminate information and help more people on a larger scale. So we started this group in around 2015, and we have lots of resources for people. I share information about donor conception on Instagram every week, and I have a really great newsletter that's full of information for people. So there's lots of free information, videos, and articles on my website that people can access. And I also have a new group coming up. It's a 4-session group for people to talk about donor conception, and that will start in 2 weeks. And I'm very excited about it because I find that typically within about 4 sessions, people really get all the information that they need to know about a particular topic, whether it's raising donor conceived children or how to find a donor, how to think about your donor, all sorts of things. Usually within 4 sessions or so, people get what they need. And so I'm not here to kind of string it out for people. I really want to just give people what they need. So it's a 4-session group. It's discounted because it's a group, and so it's about $50 a session. It comes out to $200 US for the 4 sessions, and I will provide a lot of information during those 4 sessions for everyone, and everyone will leave with a really nice supportive community that is built around a common goal, which is really to try to be the best parent and really be the best you can for your donor conceived child.
Absolutely. And I wanted to tell you, because I haven't had a chance to speak to you, but publishing this article, which a lot of people have read, as I mentioned, the link
Right.
is in the bio, about things that donor conceived children may want parents to know. You've listed 10 things in this article, and also why it might be important to start My Life book to document your journey. Because, before we talk about that, just going back to the 10 things that donor conceived children may want parents to know, when I read it, everything resonated with me because I'm starting that process myself. So much so that I called my husband over and I said, "You need to come and read this. You need to listen to this." Um, yeah, and so I really, really, anyone who is going through donor conception or has donor conceived children, it is definitely an article you should check out. As I mentioned, the link is in the bio. So we'll move on to that in a
That's great.
second. But
Thank you. Yeah,
before we do that, you also talk in the article about My Life book. And it's a tool that you give people to beautifully document their journey with whatever path they're taking. And again, reading it and knowing your fantastic resources and this book, I wish I had done it, because it can feel quite painful doing that at the time, can't it? And it can feel like not necessarily something that you might think that you want to look back on in time. But I wish I had something like that to show to our children and to remind myself of the pain that we went through and how we, looked after each other and the steps that we took, etc.
Well, I really appreciate that, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that today in as part of what I wanted to talk about. But certainly, what's really nice about, and I have information about this on my website too. What's nice also about my life book is that even if you don't start it early, you can always do it later. I work with lots of families whose children become part of the story. They all sit down together as a family and they say, let's do this together and let's pull in some information. The kids can start to contribute to it. They can draw pictures in there. And they can put their own information in there too. So that's always a possibility.
That's good to know.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
So tell us more about how the narrative starts, when people should consider it, and concerns people might have even from preconception.
So I think the best place to start is just with a little history and research, because I think it's so helpful for people to know, where this is all coming from. So even though donor sperm has been around for, 100 years, and there was, some really good research, particularly out of New Zealand about donor conception with donor sperm, it really wasn't the idea of disclosure and how to talk to children in an effective way was really not researched as much until ovum donation started around the 80s. And lots of people in the group that I belong to, the mental health group for the American Society for Reproductive Medicine, thought about how do we really talk to children in a way that's helpful. And so, of course, many people started to look at the adoption community, because particularly here in the US, there was a large number of children who were adopted in the 1950s. And so we have decades of research on those kids. And what those adult adoptees said, was, I really wish that my parents had talked to me in the crib. And there are two reasons for that. First of all, it's always an awkward conversation to first have with your child, right? Whether your donor conception began with your infertility journey, whether it began because you had a medical issue, or if you're a same-sex couple and you needed donor conception. Regardless, it's going to be something that you might feel uncomfortable talking about. And you want your child to feel good about themselves, and you want them to feel comfortable with the information. And so parents typically trip over their words, they feel a little anxious, and your parents, are going to do that naturally, and maybe they'll have their tears about it. And children don't look at their parents and say, well, my parents really love me and they're trying to get this right. Children very often will say, well, why are my parents acting so weird if this is a normal thing? Mm-hmm. So to prevent that, if you come home from the hospital and literally put your child in the crib, then you have the benefit of talking about the story in a way that feels comfortable for you, and trying on, which I'll talk a little bit in a moment, trying on a bunch of different narratives and finding something that works for your family. You can trip over your words, you can have your tears about it, you can talk about it over and over again, and finally, by the time your child understands it, it just rolls off your tongue, which solves the second problem, which these adult adoptees said, is that you never have to sit down with your child and have this big talk. And so that makes it just easier for everybody. But again, it's never too late. So anytime you talk about it is good. So then, some other researchers said, well, because this is really not about adoption, this is really about biology, what if we looked at kids a little bit older? And so there were a lot of discussions about children who are maybe in nursery school or kindergarten, where children come to school and they start to talk to other children, because of course many children have peers who are having siblings, right? And so it's natural to say, well, why does Janie's mom have a big belly? Well, you need an egg and a sperm and a uterus to have a baby, and we had two of those things, and we went to this nice lady and got a gift from her, and now we got this third thing, and we were able to have you. And maybe there's a conversation there. So a researcher, actually a British researcher, did a large study looking at donor-conceived children in both groups, and she found that in both groups, the children turned out fine. There were no greater developmental issues in one group versus the other. but for the kids who were told in the crib, there seemed to be a greater level of cohesiveness. Now, we do have follow-up research from that study and also subsequent research, one study that was done at Cornell not so long ago here in New York, that found that the longer parents wait, the more uncomfortable they become. So perhaps parents are just feeling like there's this elephant in the room and it can be difficult to talk about. And so it makes sense that for the parents and then ultimately for the children, the earlier you start, the better.
Mm-hmm.
So I do these workshops, as you know, for donor conceived children. They're called Tip Top. And it's a workshop designed and there's a full curriculum designed to help children share their donor conception information with others. Because, of course, today we're talking about how to talk to your children, but at some point it will be your child's information to share or not to share. And they need to be equipped with the tools to know how to do that. And so we do that in our workshop, and we work with the parents and we work with the children separately, and we pull them together afterwards. So there are ways to help children with this information, but I really find year after year that children do like to have their information in several ways. So no kid wants to be different, right? So it's important to help them understand difference. But at the same time, you also want them to not feel strange, right? You want them to feel like they're normal. So, of course, all children come from the same place. All children come from a sperm, an egg, and a uterus, regardless of your family situation. There are lots of people who are now forming families in all different ways, but we still need the same three things. So all children are the same that way. But it's also important to give your child, I think, some diversity training so they understand that there's an acceptance for difference. And so if the family is accepting difference and accepting difference out there in the world, there's this implicit understanding there's also difference in our home and within yourself. And then once that information becomes clearer, the child will then have the foundation for understanding that that's okay too. So I'll give you some examples. And I have a whole book list on my website. That's familybuilding.net. So this is an example of a cute book about
Mm-hmm.
different ways to have a family. Sometimes you have one mom, sometimes there are two dads, sometimes you live in an apartment, sometimes you live in a house. There's all kinds of ways to have a family. What you really need is love to have a family. That's the most important thing. And of course, there are lots of books. You don't have to buy that one. I really like this book that was made in the 70s by Sesame Street, which actually has the same sort of stories. So you need to find something that works for you. And then you can decide, do I feel comfortable talking about it in story form? So this is, an example of a kind of a storybook model, right? There's two elephants and they go to a doctor elephant and they want a baby elephant. The baby and the doctor elephant says, well, we need this other lady elephant and she can give you this gift, right? So that's a more storybook form.
But just to interrupt you there, sorry,
Yeah.
that's the one that we use nearly every night, and it's so well loved. It's been in the bath, it's been like torn in places, but
That's
everyone, all three children of ours want to hear the elephant book.
Oh, really?
Or the
That's
Mummy Tummy
fantastic.
book.
That's
Yeah.
great. That's
But just
great.
what you were saying before about talking to children from an early age and getting the narrative right, well, not right, but just feeling comfortable about it yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I'm having that at the moment, and my husband and I haven't yet got to the stage of doing it at the same time. We seem to do it on our own at random times, but we haven't all talked about it as a family yet. Our children are still very young. The twins are 2, and our eldest is 4. But as an example, I saw my mother-in-law today, and I can't remember how it came up, but I said to my oldest daughter who's 4, do you want to tell Granny about, how you came into the world and what happened when Mummy and Daddy tried to have a baby? And sometimes she'll surprise me and say, yes, I do. And she'll start reenacting the Elephant Book or bits of it. And we went on an airplane to America. And she knows the name of our doctor. But today she said, she rolled her eyes and said, oh, no. So she didn't want to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I said, okay, don't worry,
Mm-hmm.
that's fine. And so I think it's just, working out as you would with anyone having a conversation, like not pushing it when people don't want to talk about something.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yes, and as your children grow, as you've already seen, they change, right? And they're going to feel differently at different ages. My children went through a very similar program, and as the Tip Top program. And one of my children was very, very interested in the program and very involved, and the other one wasn't, and the other one wasn't year after year after year. And finally, one day, I saw her in her bedroom looking at her book. So you just never know, right? So that's why it's so helpful to kind of keep planting these seeds with the children, because you don't know when it's going to occur to them that this is something that's interesting to them. You don't know when they're going to feel that this is important to them. And, they may always feel differently. I have these twin girls in my practice, and they're twins, and both of them were on their way off to college, and one said, I really, really want to meet my donor, this is really important to me. The other one said, I don't care. So you really just don't know. What's important, I think, is that you're there and you're available to your children as they grow and they develop. And I have a program on my website about developmental stages that children go through. And you see, even in school, children start to understand things differently. So of course, their understanding of their donor conception is going to change too. Um, so just to kind of finish with the book. So this is, kind of like a gender neutral book. There's a sperm source and an egg source. It's kind of a little bit more modern. And then, a lot of people like books like this that are very specific about a sperm and an egg. And that's really the way that they feel comfortable talking about their story, right? But there's also, lovely books that talk in metaphor, like, this is a very sweet book about butterflies that have magical wings, and some lady butterflies have extra spots on their wings, and they can give those spots to other lady butterflies to have a baby butterfly. So I think every family has to work out what works best for them, and as you just pointed out, the children are going to be part of that over time, and maybe they'll gravitate to one book or another, and maybe your family feels comfortable with one type of narrative or another. But I also find in my groups that children also like to have a story of their own. So that's why I made the life book. And I was finding that in the donor conception world, there wasn't really a lot of books like this, and certainly the ones that were there were too heteronormative, and I didn't feel really that it included everyone. So this just kind of chronicles your story. It's almost like you can make a scrapbook talking about your life starting to have a baby and what that meant to you, what it meant to your family. You can put your doctor's business cards in here, or information about your donor agency. You can talk about the things that you did and the memories along the way. Children love to read about their story. And of course, lots of people have baby books, and those are, books about the child's life and, how many times they pooped and all of that. This is not it. This is really a pre-baby book. So these are things that you shared. And then, of course, we have, which I really like, because, of course, there's always this dreaded family tree project at school, a way to talk about in, a visual sense about your donor conception. So, you can put the parents here if there are two parents. You can put a donor or a surrogate, depending upon, how you brought your child into the world. And then you have your whole family. So you have the roots of the tree, but then you also have your whole family, which really, I think, helps children conceptualize what their beginnings were like. And, as I said, I think the children really like to have a story of their own as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's really why I am in this, in this world. I love to help people, and I love to find ways to help people have an easier journey.
Amazing. And the events that you run so you run them for people who are on their conception journey as well as people who already have donor conceived children, is that right?
Yeah, so the support group the support group that's coming up is for people on their journey. Of course, I'm happy to include people who already have donor conceived children, because there's a lot of information there that will be helpful in terms of understanding your donor, ways to think about the donor, ways to explain your donor. But the Tip Top group is really for people with their children at the same time. And it's
Hmm.
really about only about helping the children to understand how to talk to other people
Hmm.
um, about their story.
And how can people find out more about these events? Because they're virtual, aren't they?
I have not found a way to make the Tip Top group virtual yet. I'm talking with one of the places where I do the group every year at one particular place in New York City. And I'm talking to them about different ways that we can do it. I have not found a way to make that Tip Top group virtual yet, but I'm still working on it.
Is it because it's interactive?
It's very interactive with the
Yeah.
kids, and I'm running around with the kids the whole
Yeah.
time and doing activities with
Uh-huh.
them. And a lot of it is very physical. We're jumping over ropes. We're doing things to kind of express ourselves in different
Hmm.
ways. And so it's very physical, and so that's kind of hard. And I think kids nowadays are frustrated with being on Zoom already.
Yeah,
I
they
think if
are.
their parents asked them to do one more Zoom thing, they would probably be even more angry with them. So I certainly don't want to contribute to that.
But the
But
support groups.
but the support groups
Yeah.
are on Zoom. Yeah, yeah,
Uh-huh. And
yeah.
so how can people find those who are trying
Um,
to conceive?
at familybuilding.net. Yeah, familybuilding, www.familybuilding.net. And you can sign up there and get more information, ask questions. My email address is there. All my contact information is there. So anyone who wants any information just can reach out to me all the time. And
Fantastic. Thank
I
you.
think you're setting a fantastic example for
What,
for
in
our
terms of
viewers
talking
here.
to children?
Hmm.
But I've realised that I think I've said this quite a lot, and apologies if people have heard this before, but my oldest daughter, I feel like I've talked to her a lot about it because she's the first, and the twins, like, life is very, very busy, especially with all I do for Fertility Help Hub. So I feel like I need to invest more time in giving the twins the same sort of narrative that I've already developed with my older daughter, because it's easy when they're younger to think, they don't understand yet, but it's just planting those little seeds, as you said, isn't it? So that it makes you more comfortable and gives you the confidence to think, I can talk to them about this. It's okay if I say the wrong word or can't find the right word, because no one's perfect, and
No.
no matter how much you rehearse something.
Of course,
um
and the most important thing in even in bonding is the trying things, right? That your children feel in their heart that you're trying, right? When we, all of us, when we start the parenting journey, nobody knows what kids don't come with an instruction manual, right? And so we get to know over time, oh, that's my kids, cry for, a diaper change, or that's my kids cry because they're tired. And that's what the child feels, is that you're continuing to make an effort on their behalf, and that's the most important thing. And I also think that your oldest daughter probably can chime in on her, version of the story too. That might be something
Absolutely.
nice for her to be part
Yeah.
of, being a
But
big sister.
actually, I forgot to say, talking about my experience today and how she responded and wasn't interested today, I forgot to say that because I was sort of asking those questions with my mother-in-law there, I almost felt nervous talking about it, because I've never talked about it in front of someone else before.
Hmm.
Is that
Yeah.
normal?
Absolutely. Well, I think I think it's helpful for you to kind of think about how you feel about it, because some people really feel like this is my child's information to share or not to share. Some people feel that they like to be very open. We're an open family. We tell the world. We're really comfortable with it. We like to be open about it. But yes, at some point, your daughter might say, "Hey, mom, you know what? I don't want to talk about it in front of grandma."
Hmm.
She might say that to you. You'll see, and your child will have that feeling, but maybe that's what you're feeling, is that feeling that this is like a private story for your daughter, and maybe it feels uncomfortable in front of your mother-in-law.
Mm. And as you said, using the wrong words to kind of introduce it, that's how it felt. But I think it's just
What
because
do
it
you
was
mean?
the first time. Well, just wondering. Well, my my mother-in-law is a psychotherapist, so that's probably playing on my mind. But
um,
just the language that I use to kind of introduce the subject.
well, there's no wrong way. It's all a matter of trying it out and sharing your information, sharing your feelings, with a full heart. And so, I think if your mother-in-law makes you nervous, it's probably better not to talk in front of.
And then in terms of the brilliant article which you've written for Fertility Help Hub, which is in the link in bio, you give these 10 sort of feelings that donor conceived children or adults have said that they want their parents to know. Would you mind telling us a bit about those? And everyone should go and read the article in full, because it's we won't elaborate on it as much as we do there. But where have these thoughts come from? And would you be able to tell people a little bit more about the general feelings that children want their parents to know?
Mhm. Well, I think the most important thing to think about, and I don't know everyone who's joining, I don't know where you all are in your journey, or if you have young children or older children, or where you are. But I think that, and I think you probably could relate to this, your experience when you are going through fertility treatment. If you're going through fertility treatment and you're not a gay couple and you're going through fertility treatment and you're having a difficult time, and so the road to parenthood can be fraught with a lot of pain. And so the pain of being not having a child, and the pain also at the same time of feeling like I'm so upset that I can't have a genetically connected child.
Yeah.
Both of those feelings and that pain is kind of intertwined, I think. And there's so much, sorrow and grief that happens on the road to finally choosing donor conception. For some people, it's shorter than others, but it is for many a painful process. And then when you get there, and you're a parent, it's fantastic, right, to have kids, and it's beautiful and it's wonderful. But that doesn't mean that your sadness about your own infertility is totally gone, right? You still may say, gosh, I love my kids, but I wish my kids had my Irish, freckles or whatever it is. You can still have those feelings because that's personal to you. It's not about your kids. And so I think it's hard, and and the reason why I write a lot of articles about this is it's hard for people to kind of project themselves forward and think about what their life is going to be like down the road, what their children's life is going to be like down the road, how the children are going to feel, because sometimes it gets so clouded by our own emotions. I also talk a lot about choosing a donor for that reason, because I think even choosing a donor is so often clouded by, pain and sadness that it's very hard to think practically. So that's why I like to write articles like that one, and also like how to choose a donor and things that really can kind of help us kind of step back and say, okay, well, wait a minute. I know I'm upset. I know I have my feelings and I'm entitled to my grief. But if I step out of it for a second, how practically can I manage the situation with my children? Mm-hmm. How practically can I choose a donor? Not letting go of my grief. I have to process that on my own, but I also need to be thoughtful about my donor choice, or about how my children are going to feel, or what they might need, because they can be clouded by our own feelings.
I actually had a reader message today saying that they're struggling to find a donor who matches her husband, and asking my thoughts on that, having been there. And I know that people may not want to hear this or may not always agree, but I just said that that mattered so much to us at the time as well, trying to find this donor who was the replica of my husband. He was never going to be, but actually all the things that we were very concerned about or spent a lot of time worrying about don't matter now. And actually a lot of them, well, some of the things, like education and medical history we had a practical head about, and were and are important, but some of the physical attributes were never going to fully match my husband. And he was desperate to have a donor with blue eyes, and one out of our 3 children has blue eyes. She also has red hair, and the red hair has come from the donor. So as much as you try and potentially replicate the person whose genetics you're grieving, when the children are there, those kind of anxieties or concerns shift. Would you agree?
Absolutely. And I think that so many people, well, at some other point, hopefully you'll have me back on and we can talk a little bit more about choosing a donor, but because I have some thoughts about that too. But I do think that it's so hard to remember that it's not really possible to replicate anyone, even people, people that we know, right, in the public eye. In England, you see the two princes of England; they don't look anything alike, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in our country, our ex-president Bill Clinton was president of the United States and had the highest IQ of any president, and his brother's an alcoholic and can't keep a job, right? So even in everyday life, we see many situations where people don't look like their siblings, but because of our hurt and because of the sadness that we feel,
Mm-hmm.
it's hard to think about that because we just so desperately want to replicate ourselves, even though, you know, my child could have my grandfather's ears and my grandmother's nose and, my be the same height as my sister instead of the same height as me, right? There's no way of knowing those things. And so what we really need to do is kind of think about the gene pool rather than the person, and also understand that we're entitled to have our sadness about it,
Yeah.
and try not to mix the two if we can. It's hard to do.
Very hard. Yeah, absolutely.
Very hard to do.
And if anyone got any questions for Lisa, please feel free to ask, whether that is about donor selection or about talking to children. One thing I wanted, please do ask if anyone wants to, but one thing I did want to speak to you about before we end is, do you feel that there are different ways to speak to your children at different stages of their life, or different ages?
Yes. So, I cover that in my video. I have a short video program on my website, and I cover that information developmentally from babyhood through the teen years. But yes, I mean, if we think about even basic development, so let's say you have a child who is in kindergarten, and you have a kindergarten book, and the book says, um, Joe decided to pick up a baseball bat and hit the baseball really hard, and he knew that he could probably run around all the bases if he hit the ball really hard, right? And then fast forward a year or so, not even that long later, the child's developing abstract thinking, and a very similar book might say Joe was struck with the idea as he stepped onto the plate that he could get a home run if he hit the ball very hard, right? Because all of a sudden now you're talking about abstract thinking. The child is starting to think about things in abstract ways, whereas before they thought in very concrete terms. So that's a very, just one example of how children change. But if we kind of translate that and put that into the donor conception story, you can see how it would be very easy to be in a situation where a child will be young and parrot their donor conception story, because that's what young children do. They parrot the story. They parrot the story to their parents, and the parents say, okay, my kids, they've got it. They know, we're done. They understand the whole thing. And then a year or two later, the child says, well, wait a minute. Can you explain this to me again? I don't really get it. And you think, well, didn't I tell them that 1,000 times already? I don't understand. We spent so much time in the bathtub reading that elephant book. So it's natural for children to start to think about things in different ways as they grow.
Okay. And do you think that there's any particular age where children might be more accepting than other ages as they grow?
Well, I think, again, the earlier you start and the more you drop the seeds for a multitude of reasons, it can be more helpful. Certainly, if you don't do that, then of course it's better to do it at any time you can. I'm working with a family right now who is just starting to talk to their children, and they have triplets, and the triplets are preteens, and it's kind of a tough time. And we're all kind of working on the life book together, actually, as a preteen project. But you can really do it at any time. Those years are certainly more difficult than starting as a baby. I even have someone now in my practice who just talked to her daughter, and her daughter's 5, and the daughter started to have some difficulty with it. So it would have probably been easier if that child had known earlier. Does that mean that she shouldn't say something? No, of course she should still do it. So I think, to answer your question, it's more about are there times that are more difficult than others? Anytime you do it is good because it's important to do it, but there are certainly times that it can be more difficult.
Because what I'm personally finding is that, reading these books and explaining that you had help from a very kind man or woman, whatever it might be, and the bits that were missing, and for us it was Daddy was missing some parts, they weren't working. But they obviously at this stage, well, for 2 and 4, don't understand. They might say, oh, okay, yeah, the donor, and say the donor. And my daughter said, I want to meet the donor. But they don't know that that means that they're not genetically connected to my husband, their father. So I don't know at what point that shifts, that they realize, hang on a second, we're not biologically connected.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it really depends on the child. Some children will learn around 7 or 8 years old. They'll start to understand that a little bit more because they understand that people are related by blood. And any other way of being related can be confusing, like adopted children, for example, get a little confused about the idea of the law being a permanent thing. And in donor conception, we can see the same thing for children who are 7 or 8 or 9 years old, kind of being a little bit confused. And then certainly as they get to the preteen years, it becomes really difficult. As a matter of fact, just this morning, I was speaking to a woman who's really spent a lot of time talking to her daughter, and now her daughter is in biology class and just starting high school in biology class, and she says, hey, wait a minute, I get it, and so it's just hitting her in a different way.
Right.
And so she's saying, can you just explain this to me, Mom? I don't really get it, and does this really mean? So she's, and I don't want to say that she's had any denial around it, but she's had some more difficulty absorbing it maybe than maybe some of her peers. And here was a biology class that kind of triggered that light bulb in her head. But the good news for her is that her mother has been sharing this with her for a long time. It's not new information. She's got a foundation of acceptance. She has a foundation of understanding that everyone builds families in different ways, and it's not the first time that she's going to understand this. She doesn't feel betrayed by her parents. She doesn't feel that there's anything wrong with it. It's just kind of new to her again.
Yeah. Last question. Do you think that you can over talk about it, where it becomes too big of a thing? It's hard to know the balance between mentioning it enough and then feeling like you're making too big a deal of it. Well, not a deal of it, but forcing it into the conversation.
Yeah. So, again, this is kind of a developmental thing. I think when, it's very easy for little kids to weave it into the storybooks, or for some people to talk about it in, other ways. I have a couple I'm working with. We made a kind of a video series with their donor, and they like to watch it, and they talk about how, the children were, came to be in their family. So it's easy to weave it into a child's life when they're little. As they get older, you get busy with other things. So I think it's good just to kind of drop those seeds every so often. And then, from time to time, I think if there is a good reason, and you can always kind of look for something, you can always touch base with your child and say, if they say something like, oh my gosh, I can't believe my hair is so frizzy, you might say, do you ever wonder, where you got your frizzy hair from? And they'll say, no, Mom, why are you asking me that question? That's, like, what's the big deal? Or they might say, yeah, Mom, I've been thinking about that. So you just don't know. I think it's really helpful to be inquisitive. If I can share one quick little story with you. So, and this is why I think it's really good to be inquisitive, and not, it's very hard for us as parents not to try to jump in and solve the problems and fix everything. So I was working with this family, and the mom and dad decided that they were going to stop reading to their child every single night at bedtime, because this child was starting to read on her own and not having as much difficulty reading. She was in first grade, she was reading on her own. So they said, okay, we're not going to read to her so much a night. So the daughter starts to ask her mom about her donor. She starts to ask more and more questions about the donor. And so the mom says, what are you thinking about? She says, I think maybe I should just meet the donor. And she said, well, why? What do you think the donor would be like? Well, she'd be really nice. She'd be really sweet. I think I'd like her a lot. Now, at that point, it's very easy for the parent to say, okay, well, let me just figure it out and let's get 23andMe and let's see if there's, it's very natural for parents to want to just fix things. But she continued to ask her daughter, well, what do you think she would be like? And they started talking about it. And she said, Mom, I think she would read to me at night. So it wasn't about the donor at all. It was really about the fact that she wanted her mom to read to her more again. And so I think that's why, again, kind of going back to this issue, which I think is kind of maybe the theme of our talk tonight about your emotions and how hard it is for us to separate our emotions from, what our children might need or from practical situations. That in that situation, it would be very natural for the mom just to kind of want to rush in and fix everything. But she was able to clarify what the child really was thinking by just asking more questions.
That's so interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for sharing these stories tonight and for all of your tips. And for anyone who's watching this back, please do get in touch with Lisa, because you have a wealth of experience and knowledge. And, being helped on this journey is more than you could imagine. So yeah, I would encourage anyone who's looking at donor conception or has donor conceived children to get in touch. So thank you so much for your time today. And as I mentioned, the article is in the link in bio if people want to check it out. And there's also links to your website and my life book if people want to look into purchasing that resource as well. So thank you very much, Lisa.
Thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate seeing you.
Thanks everyone for joining. Bye-bye.
Bye everybody.
Bye.